Imagine a room, okay, just picture this. A room full of all the top researchers in neuroscience.
Yeah.
You know, the ones like pushing the boundaries of brain science, really making a difference. And now only 1 in 4 are women.
Wow.
That's the reality.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at today.
Yeah, that's the uphill battle right there in a nutshell.
Yeah. And that's why we're doing this deep dive today, right? We're going behind the scenes of this study that was published in Brain Communications, which, if you don't know, it's a journal that launched back in 2019.
Right, relatively new.
With a really bold claim to champion diversity. So we want to see if they're actually walking the walk.
Yeah. Are they putting their money where their mouth is? And I think this study is really interesting because it looks at the journal over a very specific and critical time. So from when it was launched in 2019 through 2021, so it covers a period of pre-pandemic and then the big shift that happened when the pandemic started.
So you've got this kind of new journal saying we're all about diversity, and then you're also throwing in this huge global event that we know really impacted women in academia disproportionately.
Absolutely.
So
really good.
This should be an interesting deep dive.
Yeah, for sure.
So tell us a little bit about how they actually went about this. Like, how do you even study this?
So they took a really close look at over 7,000 authorships across hundreds of articles, and they looked very carefully at not just, the overall gender breakdown, but where people were in the authorship hierarchy, because we know that's really important.
And that's something that I think is really fascinating for people listening, like in the world of scientific publishing, where your name falls on that author list is not just about who gets top billing. It's about your contribution, your seniority. It can really impact your career trajectory.
It's huge. Yeah.
So first author, usually that's a junior researcher,
right?
They're the ones in the lab doing the experiments.
Absolutely.
But last author, that's the big boss.
That's the PI.
Calling the shots. Getting a lot of the credit.
Exactly.
So that's really what it comes down to, right?
And that's where we see a really stark trend that emerges in this study. Kind of the leaky pipeline in action, right? So they found that women make up, a decent amount of first authors, right? 42.4%.
Yeah, that's almost half.
Almost half right of first authors in these Brain Communications publications. But then when you look at last authors, that number plummets to 24.9%.
Oh, wow.
Big difference.
Yeah, that's huge.
Huge.
So like basically for every 10 women who were starting out their careers in neuroscience, you're only seeing 2 or 3 reaching those senior positions.
Exactly.
It's kind of alarming when you think about it.
Yeah.
So that's already a pretty,
a stark reality.
A stark reality check right there.
Yeah.
But then you layer on top of that what the study found about the COVID-19 pandemic, and it gets even more concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we already know from just, living through it that the pandemic disproportionately impacted women in the workforce, especially those trying to balance research with, increased caregiving demands at home.
Right. School closures and all that.
Exactly. And so this study really captures that societal upheaval, showing an actual dip in female authorship, both in terms of submitting new research and participating in the peer review process after the pandemic started. And while it's not, a direct causal link, it definitely raises some red flags about, these existing inequalities being exacerbated by the pandemic.
Yeah, it's almost like this perfect storm brewing, right? You have this leaky pipeline already in place, and then the pandemic hits and further erodes, the already tenuous foothold that women have in these fields. It really highlights how these societal issues can't be separated from scientific progress.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really important takeaway. And it makes the next part of the study even more crucial because remember, Brain Communications, they launched with this big emphasis on inclusivity, right? So the researchers wanted to see, okay, are the journal's own practices, their selection of reviewers, their editorial decisions, are these things actually contributing to the disparities they observed?
So they're putting their own house in order, so to speak.
Okay.
Were there any smoking guns?
Well, not exactly. The study actually found no statistically significant difference in acceptance rates based on the author's gender, meaning that a manuscript submitted by a female first author was just as likely to get published as one by a male first author.
So on the surface, it seems like their decision-making is fair.
Right.
But I can't help but think there's got to be more to it. We're still seeing this huge drop-off between women as first authors and women as last authors. So where's the disconnect?
I think that's a really valid point, and that's where the nuances come in, right? So while the editorial decisions themselves seem to be fair, the study does point out an area for improvement, and that's the composition of the reviewer pool. So their percentage of female reviewers, it was slightly better than some more established journals.
Okay.
But it still wasn't reaching parity, which suggests there's room for growth in terms of who's evaluating the research.
So even if their editorial process is completely, above board, the pool of experts weighing in might not actually be fully representative of all the amazing neuroscientists out there. It makes you wonder if those subtle biases, right, whether they're conscious or unconscious, could be creeping in during that review process.
Yeah.
Even if it's not glaringly obvious in those final acceptance rates. It's like having a scientific conference, right? But only inviting speakers from one specific institution.
Exactly.
You might have brilliant minds in the room, but are you really getting the full picture?
It's a great analogy.
Are we missing out on crucial perspectives?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point to consider, and it's something that Brain Communications seems to be taking seriously.
Okay.
They actually highlighted a couple of their initiatives that are designed to address this very issue, the Reviewer Academy and the Observers Program.
Oh, I've heard a little bit about those. Tell us more.
Yeah. So the Reviewer Academy, I think, is a really interesting one. It's essentially a training ground for early career researchers, giving them the tools and experience they need to provide really good peer review.
That's great.
And guess what? Over half of the Academy's participants so far have been women.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So it's really great to see them putting their money where their mouth is.
It's like they're actively building a pipeline, but instead of leaking, it's actually like channeling that early talent into shaping the future of the field.
Exactly. And then there's the Observers Program.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool. It offers this kind of behind-the-scenes look at the editorial process.
Interesting.
For neuroscientists at all career stages. So imagine, shadowing the journal's scientific editor, seeing how editorial decisions are made, understanding what makes a really strong manuscript.
That's incredible. I bet that's so helpful for young researchers.
It's huge.
Especially for those who don't have, those informal networks or mentors to guide them.
Yeah, absolutely.
It can really level the playing field.
Exactly. And I think that's what it all comes down to, right? Creating a more transparent and inclusive environment where everyone feels empowered to share their work and contribute to these important scientific conversations.
Because when we have that diversity of voices, right, we all benefit from it. New questions are asked, new avenues of research are explored, and ultimately we get a richer and deeper understanding of the brain.
Exactly. It benefits everyone.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive today, we're left with a lot to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
The Brain Communications study, it shows us that, this gap in gender representation, it's still there. It's persistent.
It's a work in progress, for sure.
But it also highlights these really innovative programs like the Reviewer Academy.
Yeah.
And the Observers Program.
Absolutely.
Which are actively trying to change the landscape.
Exactly. It shows that change is possible. But it takes a commitment to action and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
And a belief in the power of diverse perspectives. That's what it comes down to.
I think that's a great place to end it.
So for everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us for this really, I think, important deep dive today. And remember, even small steps toward greater inclusivity, they can have a huge ripple effect and create real change in the scientific community.